Hey guys, welcome back. So, today let's go over some fuel system thoughts. So our fuel pump came in, which is great, and we found some problems that we may not be able to run this with the electric motor like we'd hoped. So, we've got a 1/2 inch shaft coming out, but you'll notice I can't spin this shaft. So what I did earlier was I put pliers on it and I was barely able to move it. So I put a socket on this and hooked a torque wrench, and it takes about 1.3 foot-pounds of torque to actually get this to spin, to keep it spinning. It's about 1.3 foot-pounds. Now, that probably doesn't sound like too much. Y'all are like, what's the big deal? So the equation for horsepower is equal to torque multiplied by RPM divided by 5252, something like that. So I did the math. At 5,000 RPMs, just to overcome the drag of like the seals and whatever else is in here, not even pumping fuel, is 1.25 horsepower, 1.25 horsepower, just to overcome friction. Now, I emailed these folks to see if maybe when they break in, maybe they're just way easier to spin or something. I mean, maybe. But 1.25 horsepower, that's a lot. We had only budgeted the actual hydraulic power to create the fuel pressure at the fuel flow we need is only 1/4 horsepower. And I had assumed that we had like 30% efficiency and we would need 3/4 horsepower going into this shaft for it to work. But that number is way off. We're going to need 1.25 just to overcome friction. So we might actually need 2 horsepower going in the shaft. So the problem with that is we don't have a 2 horsepower motor. I'll show you guys the motor real quick. Okay, so this is the motor we were going to use. And I think this is about 1/4 horse, but it'll reach out and it'll probably go to a horsepower. But I don't think it's going to do 2. And even at 1 horsepower, this thing's probably going to get really hot. Trying to do that for a few seconds is probably okay, but you wouldn't want to run it that way very long. So at this point, maybe you could put 2 of these, but now we're getting into heavy, and 2 of these would pull over 100 amps of power, so that's not really elegant. So we're kind of back to not totally to the drawing board, but not too far from it. So here's a thought. Oh yeah, I gotta show you all this stuff. But here's the fuel pump. Let's say we put this somewhere, down here, for example. Okay, we got to get a fuel pump, or sorry, not the fuel pump, the fuel tank in the front of the car. And we're looking, and we're thinking maybe there's a cavity. See the curve right here? I'm wondering if I could put a fuel tank like inside of this cavity. So what we would have to do on the front of this box, we would have to build a crash structure that extends forward and turns and goes across and ties into the front of that one. And the goal would be that crash structure would be really close to the skin here, really close, like 1/4 inch or so, and try to keep it relatively thin. And the idea is that space from here to here, we could put our fuel cell, we'd have to build it, but we could put one there. So it'd basically be really long going across the front of the car. We actually do have some height. I took some rough measurements here. I think you could build a fuel cell 7 inches tall, 5 inches this direction, 5 inches, 27 across. And if you did that, that's actually 4 gallons of fuel, which is plenty. We don't need that much, which means we could make it smaller. So we were shooting for 3 gallons, but actually we could get by with less. 3 gallons was enough to do 2 passes, so we could probably come down to like 1.5 gallons. And if we got the space for 4 gallons, basically there's plenty of space. The big advantage of putting it there, if we kind of look at it, if your fuel tank's up here, when you accelerate, the fuel is going to naturally try to slosh towards the pump. So it primes the pump as you accelerate. And of course, with the fuel tank here, if you look at it elevation-wise, the fuel tank would be higher than the fuel pump. So gravity is assisting the fuel to the pump, and acceleration would assist fuel to the pump. So it's perfect. Keeps the pump primed. The pump doesn't even have to, there's no cavitation or anything. It'd be great. So now we're looking at that, and in the past we had ruled this out because where the hell are you going to put a fuel tank? I've looked all over this place. The only other spot that's a maybe is right here where the headlight goes, this bottom space. Maybe you could get one there, but the problem, it's possible, but in the rules you have to build I'm going to say crash structure. That's not the words they use. But basically you have to put some tube around it or something. There has to be there's rules for like running a chromoly bar around it for crash safety. And they say basically you have to do that if your fuel cell's located outside of the bodywork and or outside of the frame. So what I'm thinking is, let's put it inside the frame and not have to worry about that. And we have these frame extensions coming forward, so basically we'd just build one that comes across and hugs that bumper skin, and then our fuel tank would be just inside of it. So we're thinking about doing that. We're still working on how much work it would be, things like that, making sure this is a good plan, but it does have its advantages. So one of the obvious advantages, if we can pull this off, say you have your fuel tank up here, well, your fuel pump's right there. So that line would basically go down and over to the pump. So a really short line. Coming out of the pump, it's got to go up to the fuel rail. Well, that's right there. Coming out of the fuel rail, we got to come out and go to a regulator, and then the regulator has a return back to the tank. So the whole fuel system would be right here on this one side of the front of the car. So all the lines would be short, lightweight, easy to inspect, stuff like that, you know, to check for fuel leaks or drain the system or anything like that. So definitely some advantages there. I guess the biggest downside would be putting the fuel tank in the nose. There's pros and cons. Like, one of the pros would be you have a firewall, and I have a real firewall. I welded all these holes up. So I'd have a legit firewall between me and the fuel tank. And if you think about it, I'm going to be sitting here. Now, if I put the fuel cell in the back of the car, it's going to be right there. So it's only going to be, you know, you'd have to build a firewall, but it's not going to be very far from the driver. If I put the fuel cell literally in the front of the bumper, it's going to be like, 7 or 8 feet away from me. So there's a good amount of distance between the fuel cell and the driver. Even though it's in the very front of the car, so if you get in a wreck, it's basically going to be right behind the crash structure. That's probably not great, but on the front side, on the plus side, it would have a crash structure protecting it. So basically, I don't think there's a perfect solution. There's a lot of considerations that I'm not going to get into everything, but for example, I would like to put a big turbo down low in the bottom of the car one day. So like, imagine a turbo down here with the inlet going to that front inlet right there. Well, I want to do that. And then I got a half-size radiator. That's this guy over here, which, you know, it takes up roughly half the space, no big deal. But I'm just trying to plan out, like, where's all this stuff going to go? And where's a fuel cell fit into the mix? And then, like I said, if you go outside the frame, then you got to do the chromoly tubing stuff, and there's pros and cons. I looked at some stuff online of people that have done it, and it looks pretty terrible. I saw a couple that looked okay, but most of them aren't done very well. And then I don't have, so you have to use 1 1/4" chromoly tubing. I don't have the dies for that. I have a bender, but I don't have the dies. So I'd have to buy, and these are a few $100s to buy a new set of dies that are the correct size for the tubing. And I'd still have to buy the tubing, probably. So we could do it, but it's going to cost us, and we got to wait for the dies to come in. Not the end of the world, we'll do it if we need to, but if I do this in sheet metal, I can probably design it and have the metal ordered and then just like put it together and weld it. It'd probably be fairly easy. So that's an idea for us. We're kind of bouncing it around. Today's probably gonna be a short day, but I was trying to get this figured out because when I got the fuel pump and I realized how hard it was to turn, that really threw a wrench in the plan. We thought this was gonna work, and now we're like, you know, not feeling as good about driving that with an electric motor. So anyway, that's kind of the update for now. Guess gotta figure this stuff out and let y'all know, but till next time, y'all take it easy.